Hello, hey everybody. So great to see you here in the live chat. Good to see you all there. Special welcome to all the members of the channel there as well. And thank you so much to the moderators for helping out today. I know that Dip Me in Glitter is here. Great to see you. Okay, everybody, I'm Natalie. This is Scientology Life After a Cult, where you'll catch me in the morning 7 days a week, sharing the news that has the internet buzzing about Scientology. But outside of that, I do interviews in and around this community and talk to people who have a multitude of stories. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to find out what people's stories are and share those. And there's one person in particular that I have wanted to talk to since I first started learning about him, which was honestly the first within 2 days of me coming on YouTube when I did my first interview with Aaron over at Growing Up in Scientology is when I first heard about him and downloaded his book. I'm just getting started on it, and I have a million questions. I think you guys will too. We are going to be talking today about resilience. And I think this is a topic that all of you are going to be able to relate to, because even if you've never been in Scientology, you may have had a challenge. And if you haven't, trust me, you will. You will. Life is challenges. That's how we learn, right? That's how we get better. So we're going to be talking a lot about resilience today, about his story. He's an author. He is, in my mind, an innovator. There are, once in a while, you come across people who are like doing something that you just never thought could be done. You look at, sometimes I get this question. It's not always worded like this, but the sentiment of it is, how do you, with what you've experienced and gone through, put one foot in front of the other? And I don't fully have the answer to that, but I feel like this guy might and does. And he's got a new book coming up that we're going to talk about. Actually, it might even already be out, but I'm very excited about this. I want to say, though, if you have any questions, put question in front of your question so I can grab it and keep an eye on that and keep track of as many of those as I can. I'd appreciate it if everybody here just go ahead and smashes that like button so we can get out even more notifications that we're here going live. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out for your questions. And I want to welcome my guest today, author Jamie Mustard.
Hey.
Hello. I was like, I got to make sure I unmuted you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Natalie. It's cool to see you.
I am excited to meet you. It's funny because like I was saying, when I first did an interview on Aaron's channel and talked about a lot of the things I did, I immediately was getting messages and comments about how I needed to connect with you and about your book. And I'd like to show the first book, if that's all right, so people know what I'm referencing here. And if you go to the Amazon, you are going to see, hold on, that's not the one I wanted to show first. Come on, Natalie, you've done this before. I'm just like fangirling.
I think I'm really, I always think you're really good. I say you're the hardest working woman in show business. You're like doing it.
I appreciate that. This is Jamie's book. It's called The Invisible Machine, The Startling Truth About Trauma and the Scientific Breakthrough That Can Transform Your Life. And I want to, should I pull up the other book now?
Let's wait and do it towards the end. Let's wait and talk, maybe get into the subject and talk about it later. I don't want to feel like I'm here just to promote my book. I'm here to, I'm here to share my story, the way that with the questions that you asked me. I've had an exotic life, I think, based on, and I know we have some people that we've probably known over the years because we were both in Los Angeles. The main thing is, going through something like that and what I've learned. And probably the biggest thing I've learned, and this is all in the last few years, is that most of the things that we feel, the anxiety, the bad feelings that we have based on science that is now is biological. It's not, it's not really mental illness. It's biological injuries to the body. And, that's something that I want to share.
Yeah. And you you were, because I was trying to like compare the years, because I know I'm older than you. You were born into, I mean, like I put even in the thumbnail, you were born into a human trafficking cult. I mean, just that you have this whole, we're going to get to like how I have so many questions. I'm like, my brain
Sure.
is
Yeah.
on
I'm
fire.
in your hands. I'm in your hands.
Yes, let me start with this. And for
Yeah.
those that don't know, do you kind of want to, can you kind of like, bring people up to speed a bit on your story? And then I want to get to the most, what fascinates me the most. There's so many things, but how you went from, you talk about getting to at the age of 19 and not being very literate, but you end up getting this amazing education and doing all of these things, and the whole, how you did that, and that resiliency, and what you know and what you're sharing now blows my mind. So how can you kind of fill people in who aren't familiar with your story?
Well, I will say this, and I've said this on other conversations that I've had. I was never going to share my story. I don't know if it's because I was so young when it started, but I feel like whatever the humiliation that I experienced from going into this thing as a baby, and just being connected to it in any way, has been, I would almost say, biologically humiliating and embarrassing for me. So I'd made, I was this up until really recently, in the last few months, I was going to probably die with it. And so, and that really is about, kind of humiliation and embarrassment. And, it's like, I marvel at watching some of you guys that, been in the same places as me, that were in the, inner private Navy, as children,
Fake space Navy?
in various ways. Yeah. The space Navy, and how you're able to just be so open and talk about it. Cause it hasn't been like that for me. For me, it's been like literally, until I started doing therapy, and then, came across this treatment. If I even began to talk about what happened to me when I was a kid, or the experience, I would be physically overwhelmed to the point where, I was just kind of like, I'm just never going to go there. I thought, when I'm old, I'll write a book. When I'm really old and it doesn't matter, maybe I'll tell the story of it when it will be less embarrassing. But due to, a series of events, I decided, I made the decision to share the story, because partly was I wanted to share, I wanted people to have a better understanding of trauma. And because we always think it's this mental thing that makes, we're a little crazy, and that's not true. It's we have a broken leg, but you can't see. It's a biological injury. You can see it if you have the right brain scan. And, when you think when you've gone through a traumatic event, and you think, or you, like me, you had really, really toxic stress, or what they call prolonged allostatic load, when you were young. And then people tell you you're crazy. That's really not fair. It's kind of like, it's insult to injury. You have a physical injury that's like a broken leg you can't see, and then no one would tell you, hey, Natalie, you have broken leg disorder, right?
Yeah.
So it's incredibly stigmatizing. And that's really, at the very least, what I want to do is to get people to understand that they're not crazy. They have a physical injury like any other physical injury. And now with modern science, it can be remediated.
Yeah, but even that is just so powerful. And one of the reasons I had gotten so much feedback to connect with you when I first shared my story is because I'd experienced a series of muscle spasms and things that affected my mobility for some time. And then I slowly got better. And most recently had neurologists sit me down, because they had been trying to figure this out for years, but talked about what you're talking about, where it's an actual injury, not a disorder, and that it has these physical effects on a person's body. And it just resonated so much. I was amazed by what you said, and that's such a freeing statement. And I think that in itself, I know, recognizing that, and I've watched some of your other videos and gotten familiar with it, and fascinates me because it opens the door to letting go of this kind of shame of, oh, I'm just, I had this traumatic experience. And then like with my Scientology Sea Org mentality of, well, you can't be a victim. So you have to.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a big people. That programming is so deep. I mean, I'll get a flat tire and think about, what did I do last lifetime to pull that in or something, right? Or like, so it's people. I don't know that people, if you haven't grown up in it, can understand how this kind of stuff gets into your bones and sticks all around you. But yeah, what's really interesting is, a lot of autoimmune diseases come from having this injury for too long, which is damage to the nervous system, which we could talk about. But also, I'm even at the point where, from the science that I've seen, I don't really even believe in an addict or addiction. I believe that when you see, and Gabor Mate talks about this, when you see people that are using substances, you're really just seeing somebody that is trying to regulate their nervous system. So you're seeing a trauma victim trying to regulate. Then once they do these things and you put them in your body over time, it changes your biology. And I think that, we have all these stigmatizing terms, and I would just rather call it what it is. It's when you see somebody in the street that is obviously, that's a homeless drug addict, 100% of the time, there's somebody that survived trauma and they're just trying to regulate their actual physiology. So maybe we should kind of talk a little bit about, kind of what happened to me so that people can understand, where I'm coming from.
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
So there's probably crossover between some of the people that I've talked to, but yeah, I mean, it's a very strange story of my mother was in the kind of inner fake Navy when I was a kid, and I was taken, from the hospital basically to this baby facility in downtown Los Angeles, where there was, dozens and dozens of babies with one caretaker in really what I would just call horrific, unsanitary conditions, no human touch. I mean, one of my caretakers actually saw me on a video and reached out to me in the last few months and told me how they used to bathe us.
Wow.
And basically she said there was, 40 babies, no human touch, in cribs all day. So the kind of thing that would pretty much destroy your life, even if you survived that. And then she was telling me the way they used to bathe us was they would run a bath, fill it with warm water, and then just dip us and then move us along down the line every few days. They wouldn't change the water. So they'd be taking us out of a dirty diaper, dip us in this tepid water, and move us on down the line. The other person would put it, and that would happen every few days. So a lot of days we were, lying in our own sick, our own snot, for days at a time. It was it's kind of hard to believe, but it's there's no baby pictures of me because there was no one around I was in this facility. I think there's one baby picture of me that a relative took. There was a Polaroid on a trip to visit in LA, but when I was probably a year old or something, but that's missing. And that was just the beginning of an onslaught of growing up in these dormitories, and you just can't describe the conditions. We're talking about never learning to brush your teeth, not being made to bathe. You don't clean your clothes. You don't wash your sheets, and you're growing up in these tenements with roaches and other kids, by 3 years old, I'm living, we moved eventually from there to this brick building on Melrose, which is like really the House of Horrors, where it really this is a continuation of the House of Horrors before the Big Blue Building. Mm-hmm. And, being 3 years old, third on a bunk, and in this kind of poverty, militaristic kind of conditions. I mean, I don't know where you want to go with it, but it was, that was the first 12 to 13 years of my life. And it was just a gauntlet of, psychological and physical abuse.
Wow.
And it's really hard for me to talk about in the sense that, I am who I am now. And it's embarrassing to me. I'm a strong person. So for me to even be on here with you, admitting that I was defiled in that way, is, it's horrific for me. It's like I don't really want people to know that about me.
Yeah.
Right. I want people to just see me as I am now. I don't want them to see me as somebody that was so tortured and so vulnerable. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just the beginning of it. We could get into some specific stories, but just the things I've seen in terms of the way kids were treated, the different types of physical abuse that were put on us. It's like Lord of the Flies meets, some sort of horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, I mean, for what it's worth, Jamie, like seeing you and speaking to you, I feel like all I see is this amazing man who overcame so much and now is wanting to take a bunch of people with him to be able to have that same thing. It's growing up in Scientology and the cult. Every time any of us would finish a course, you'd always get asked, would you want someone to have similar gains to yours? And you always had to say yes.
You're triggering me now. Like I'm just getting, yeah, all right.
But yeah. It gives so much hope because, even knowing it was so horrific, but like I said, I know I totally get where you're coming from and how that feels, but I'm just saying, I don't see that. I see strength and power and the ability to do this, because you're talking about not even like having an education.
I mean, we moved to Oregon for 2 to 3 years when I was 12 or 13. But I didn't go to school there. I mean, I just got F's in warehouse because I had no foundation, right?
Yeah.
I think I spent 2 months, or probably not even that. Time is long when you're a kid, maybe a month or so, at Lockwood Elementary School, which is in East Hollywood. But no, I didn't go to school. So at 19 years old, when I escaped, I had a kindergarten education, maybe not even that. I mean, I didn't know how to use a period. I didn't know how to use a comma. I didn't know how to do anything beyond like the most basic multiple. I couldn't do long form division. I couldn't do times tables. If I picked up a magazine or a newspaper, it might as well have been in a foreign language. I didn't know what anything was. It was, I was in a bubble. So I could read at a high level because I'm reading this doctrine from the time that I'm able to think. So I could read at a very high level because I'm looking up words in the dictionary from, a very young age. I'm doing these child study courses. But as far as any sort of expressive communication, I was entombed in my own mind. I mean, the way I haven't really been able to describe this too much, but I think it's really important to understand what this kind of form of semi-literacy is like. So I could take in information, but writing, language, that's the way you express yourself. Mathematics, science is a way of expressing yourself. So I had no expressive literacy. And that had its own form of physiological damage on me, shame, and mental pressure. I mean, I was 19, I escaped this thing, and I was looking at down the barrel of a life of manual labor. That's kind of what it was looking like for me.
So you're looking at that, you get out, you escape, then what happens?
Well, the first thing I would say is I don't think anybody is able to do anything alone. This idea of a self-made person, I think, is a fallacy.
Yeah.
I had a relative that when I was 16 saw my state and had made me an offer and said, if you ever want to deal with your illiteracy, you can come stay at my house and you will have access to a car, a nominal allowance, 3 meals a day, and you will be able to focus full time on that. And tried to get me to face that when I was 16. The illiteracy at 16, even though I'd been in Oregon, was so bad, we were kind of on our way back to LA, that I just said, no way, I'm not doing that. Because just the idea of trying to learn these things as a teenager just seemed impossible to me. So it took me, going further into the abyss, and getting really desperate. I had to get really, really desperate before I could get to the point where I was willing to take this relative up on their offer. I started at community college doing tutoring for like kids with special needs. It was really brutal to like put myself in that position. And, but I had that place. I remember I called that relative 3 years later after I escaped. I was hiding out. And I said, does the offer still stand? And she said, yes. And I said, send me a ticket. I didn't even know when I escaped if that offer stood there. But the point is that I had a place where I thought I could start something, right? And if I didn't have that, it would have been a different story. I mean, if I'm being completely straight, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And I also don't want people to think that I'm not crazy altruistic. You know, I'm not trying to be a crusader or be altruistic. I'm just trying to be a person. And I had access to these scientists and these doctors, and I had an opportunity and I took it. But I'm not one of these people that's like, I'm going to bring it all down and I'm going to change the world. And I don't really think like that. I kind of think like, okay, well, this came across me and there's a lot of people suffering out there. So, and I have an opportunity, and let's hope that I did the right thing. Right.
So at 19, you end up going to, was it in Oregon?
No, I went to New York, outside New York City.
So New York, this relative helps you and you start learning. How does that lead to, to go from, because you said yourself, right? It's such a thing that can be so embarrassing, but you ended up going to talk a little bit about how you went from that.
I went from semi-literate at 19, and again, real semi-literacy. Like it was so much so that it was affecting my body. People sometimes ask like, what was it like? And to have your mind and to not be able to express, like, I don't know how a period or a comma works. I remember one day having a 45-minute conversation with my grandmother, trying to tell me how a comma worked. Okay. And leaving that conversation more confused than when I started, like having no idea what the hell she was talking. It's a pause. Like I just couldn't get it. Right. And even though I saw them all the time in my reading, I had no idea of even the most basic grammar. Mm-hmm. So people say, what was it like? Physically, it was, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Men in Black, the first one, but Vincent D'Onofrio, he's like taken over by an alien and he's like, can't really kind of control his body. He's like lurching. That was me. That's how I felt on the inside. Okay. I would go to these, I started at this community college in Westchester County, and I would go to these kind of remedial classes, and I was doing all this remedial tutoring at the library, and it was really, it was what's the word? Humiliating. And and I didn't have grand plans. Mm-hmm. I guess my mentality was kind of like, I'm desperate. This relative has given me this opportunity. I better do something. But what was unique about it, and again, I've never really talked about it in this detail before, Natalie, so I'm kind of, hopefully I won't get emotional, and hopefully I can wrap my head around it, because no one's ever actually asked me to go into it before. That part of the education.
It's totally okay. If you do, and even if you want to get off that topic.
Okay. So no, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, so one thing is desperation. I was desperate. So I felt desperate. But the thing that was the reality was that I had never been able to do that before, had support, and not been facing and dealing with poverty at the same time, and facing and dealing with the mental manipulation of a coercive control group. So I had all these monkeys. I was just covered in like machinery weighing me down. And all of a sudden I had this really hard thing to do, but that's all I had to do. And I was desperate. And I probably spent a 2-year period where I didn't leave or barely left a room. And I read until my eyes bled. I took these remedial classes and started to, it took me, even when I got into school, I ended up graduating from this incredible school in England. But even when I got there, I was still dealing with the remnants of it. So I was, I mean, God, let's get really specific. So even in the first 2 years in, I went to this community college for a year or so. Then I went to a small private college that was giving out, opportunities to people that were underserved or just hadn't had a chance. So they kind of gave me a chance. And I couldn't write papers because I didn't know grammar. Mm-hmm. And I met this girl, and she would, I would write my papers without grammar, and they were just a mess and illegible. And she was this really kind girl that rewrote everything for me, but just put the grammar in and made it so you could read it. And I went back and forth in that process with her for a year. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that year, I was kind of writing, it was kind of legible, and I was kind of starting to figure out the periods. But even when I got, I mean, this is embarrassing to say, but even when I got into the London School of Economics, which is where I graduated from, I was still dealing with the remnants of that. So it was a very strange thing because I was smart, but I didn't know I was smart. I never had glasses growing up. I had bad eyesight, and I went to the doctor, right? Yeah. So I'm sitting at the back of the class thinking I'm an idiot. I can't learn algebra. I really just thought I was dumb. So, I mean, I guess the best way to describe it is there was an album that came out in the 90s that I used to listen to over and over when I would go jogging in New York, called Rhythm of the Saints. It was the Brazilian album by Paul Simon. Mm-hmm. And on that album, there is a song called I Can't Run, But I Can Walk Much Faster Than This. And that was and he would just repeat it over and over. It's a very eerie, kind of soulful song. And I would kind of run and just meditate on that. And that was kind of where I lived in this kind of weird state of suspended animation for about 3 years, where I was just trying to make up for things, and again, I've never talked about it in this detail, but that song was kind of like, all right, you're screwed. You're probably in a hole that you can't get out of. You're incapable of running and doing anything magnificent, but you can walk faster. You can do better than where you are right now. And I think what most people don't understand is that it is a kind of incredible thing. If you can just put one foot in front of the other, you might go nowhere for 3 years. You might go nowhere for 4 years or 5 years. But if you do that every day for 5 years and you remain curious, there'll be like a point where it just kind of clicks. And then magical things can happen. What happens for most people is they do that for 2 or 3 years and they go, what is the fucking point? Mm-hmm. I'm not doing this. This is just a exercise in humiliation. And so I think one of the things that I learned is that it's okay to be weak and to be the fool for a very long time and just keep going. And when you least expect it, something will happen and something can happen. But most people, what happens is they start to go down that road. They're living in that humiliation or the constant, like, oh my gosh, I'm in too deep. So I'm not, and then they give up. I should have given up long time before I started to see any sort of results from my activities. Yeah.
Why do you think that you didn't give up?
I mean, if I want to be honest, I mean, that's the scary and tragic part of the whole thing. I mean, there were things in the doctrine that helped me. Even though it had destroyed me, it also helped me. We learned this stuff like intention is cause. Yeah. We learned this stuff like that if we decide strong enough, the entire physical world will split open and bend to our will. Right? So this thing that destroyed me in certain ways helped me. So there was that. I think that
there's a lot of
I think that I cover this in the children's book. I mean, which we're going to talk about, which came out in November, it's really a soft launch in November. It's coming out with Doreen Kindersley next year, and it'll be in all the bookstores. But you can get it on Amazon now, and it'll be in the UK and stuff like that. But I think that what I did that was different than what most people do is I framed it as a quest. Okay. I framed it as an adventure rather than looking at woe is me. And there was a lot of woe is me. I mean, I like, if you know from being in this thing now, especially from a young age, that you're constantly made to feel bad, you know, like through the interrogations and writing up your crimes and all this stuff. Right. So it wasn't like I wasn't beating myself up. I had a PhD in being disgusted with myself and beating myself up. Right. But I also framed it as a hero's journey, as a quest.
Yeah.
Right. And I think because I framed it as this big, like Lord of the Rings, like big adventure that I had to overcome.
Yeah.
It took on a different color in my mind. And I probably, and I think that the biggest choice that I made, even though I didn't know I was making a choice, was one is framing it as an adventure. And then two is, a lot of dark things happened to me. It was pretty dark. I mean, even when I watched this community of people that had a similar experience to me, I don't see a lot of people that had my experience. Okay. So it's not even, it's very isolating.
Yeah.
You know, but I, okay, hero's journey. Yeah. I just think that because I was able to focus at this time, I framed it as a quest and I didn't have to worry about anything else. So I had help. I had a place to land. But I also think it was a miracle. I don't know that I could repeat it. I mean, it was kind of an incredible thing, but I just think that understanding that I hope I'm answering the question.
You are.
Yeah,
you are.
Okay.
You are.
Yeah. What was the last question you asked? Because
it was like how, you had so many reasons to give up, but you didn't give up. And I really hear what you're saying. And with making it into a quest, into an adventure, that's such a key tool. I think it sounds almost like in, cognitive behavioral therapy where you reframe and you're looking at something. When you look at it differently, you're right. It does take on a whole new different way. It just depends on how you're looking at it. And I like how you looked at it that way. And I think just that one gem right there is so powerful because there's a lot that things that we struggle with that are challenges. Whereas if you make it, make it a game, make it a challenge. How many times, like I can endure this for 5 more minutes, or I can do this for 1 more day. And I think about like,
it was very much like that. It was very much like that. It was very much like probably what you're going through right now in certain ways. You know what I mean? And I mean, and also, I think that one part of it that I just realized yesterday, because I saw this creative talk yesterday, and they were talking about it, that I'd never thought about before, is there was this human being there that gave me unconditional love. And I was not very lovable because I was just a mess. And I never learned to use a fork, right? I never learned to I was raised, it's like being raised like a wild animal.
Yeah.
Okay. Is the only way that
I know I'm getting emotional, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay. I mean, it's like, I feel like I was raised like a wild animal.
Yeah.
And so this person kind of looked past all that and they gave me unconditional love, which I'd never experienced before. And I think that is probably a bigger part of the formula than I've ever realized, in the sense that I think there's something about this woman was kind of doing this talk I saw yesterday, was talking about how love is a massive part of resiliency.
Yeah.
Right. And that love helps us remap trauma as resiliency.
Love helps us remap trauma as resiliency. So kind of like looking at it through a different lens and seeing that trauma differently. When you talk about the person who showed you unconditional love, are you talking about the family member?
Yes.
Who helped you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that I didn't know what that was. I never experienced that. And it was like, no matter what I did wrong, this woman wouldn't judge me, she would just go, well, you hold a fork like this.
Wow.
This is how often you wash your clothes. You're not, you need to take a shower every day. So this is how often you're supposed to shower. She would just tell me, never got frustrated, and it was just out of love that she was willing to not judge me. And I think that I'm getting emotional now because I
It's
haven't.
just so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just so beautiful and it's so powerful. And I think it just, unconditional love is something that we can do for people. And it's
Yeah.
just like to hear your story and that was such a turning point, and look at what it did. Look at the change and the difference that made. And that's something that, it was the polar opposite. You were at the exact extreme of that. And I think it helps us to remember that in everyday things, even if we can show up with that unconditional love, that it makes a huge difference for people. And you're saying with that, it's like you saw it differently and you got the help that you needed and someone who didn't judge you.
It's a really good point, and I think that we're all guilty of when someone does something we don't like, or they anger us, or they do something where we feel betrayed. We, especially us people that have been victimized. One of the traits of having the biological injury of trauma, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, reacting, hair trigger. These are biological responses from a nervous system that gets stuck in fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that, we don't give each other grace the way that we should. I mean, there was another talk yesterday. I went to TEDx yesterday, and this very well-known chef, he talked about, he's not as kind of angry and mean and pissed off as most chefs, but he's James Beard award-winning chef, and he talked about how he got sober. He was this kind of cocaine snorting, drug, alcoholic pirate chef. And then he got sober and he started raising a family. And, he didn't know how to interact with his staff without being mean or whatever. And he took on this philosophy of what he called 70-20-10. 70% of the time, things can go pretty good. 20% of the time, they're going to be okay. And then 10% of the time, they're going to be horrible. Okay. And that if you could set those expectations for yourself, okay, that when the horrible thing happens or when the not so great things are happening, that during that 30% of the time, because your expectations are correct, right? Yeah, I do think that one of the things that we should be doing, and I'm telling myself this as I'm saying it, is trying to grant grace when people do things that we don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, you go to school, kind of pick up from there. You have that person in your life who's so supportive, and just even little things, like you said, not judging, but just, this is how you use a fork. This is how you do that. I feel a lot of that resonates for me because I did not have the same experience that you did, but there were things that I didn't know well into adulthood that I should have known. Things like that. You can have more than one pair of sheets.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
That you're
Yeah.
supposed to switch out your toothbrush. Like just didn't know. It was like in the Sea Org, you're given here. You're not given a toothbrush even. You got to go buy your own.
Yeah.
But because of living in that limit, and it's such an attitude of you got to make do with whatever you have and work with what you have and still achieve what it is you're supposed to achieve. So you go to school, you're getting your education, and from there, how does that translate into getting to where you started writing these books?
Okay. Well, let's back it up one more time and
Okay.
talk about probably I want to answer that, but I want to kind of say something right before it. Okay. I live a life where, and I'm often and have often been misunderstood. Okay. And I think one of the reasons that is because no one could meet me, at least the current, cover visage of me, and imagine in their greatest imagination the defilements and punishment of my mind and my body from literally birth in this baby factory to 13 years old. I mean, it would be like if I were to sit and tell you about the individual events day after day and the languor, it would be like reading a book where on every single page and every single sentence, a kitten is getting strangled. Like the level of poverty, I don't think even a lot of the kids that I grew up with, as gross as the Fountain Building was, or the Wilcox, right, or the Hacienda in the early days, that people can kind of fathom this level of neglect. Okay. So then I get into this position where I look like I'm normal, right? But I'm not really normal. I've got all these holes. I've got all these scars. I've got all this pain, right? And so I think that it's caused me to be a confusing person to people. Okay. But I think what I kept thinking about when I was listening to you, the biggest part of it is you can become me and achieve a few things, and then you're still going to have lots of losses, and you're still going to have lots of things, blind, things that you can't see. I don't want to say blind spots, even though it's probably, like I'm trying not to, you're going to have lots of missing pieces and missing parts. There's this incredible film called Never Let Me Go about these kids that are harvested for their organs. It's almost like the cadet org, but they're grown to be used for their parts for the richer classes. And they can drive away, they can do all these things, but they don't do it. It's from a novel called Never Let Me Go. And eventually they take enough pieces of you that you die. Okay. But you're basically used for spare parts for some more important person. And I feel like that very much represents how I grew up. Like they took pieces from me that I will never get back. Right. So I want to make sure that it just doesn't look like just big triumphant story, like I'm standing on a mountain. Okay. But why that's important, Natalie, is what I've done. What I do is when I have those moments where people are mad at me because they can't understand me, because I just don't make any sense because of the dichotomy, okay, is I forgive myself. I remind myself where I started, and I look at where I am now. And even with all the mistakes, if I don't treat somebody well, with all the all the anxiety and depression, all the times where I fall, I go, you have to look at this from where you started.
Yeah.
And if you look at this from where you started, no matter how fucked up you are right now, or what you did to that person, or what you did to yourself, you're fucking killing it. If you look at this from where you started, right? And I think what a lot of people do is when they kind of get out of horrible life circumstances and they get into some semblance of normalcy, they start looking at themselves from the point of view of the people around them who've had maybe a more normal start than them. And they go, oh God, and then they just focus on their brokenness because they're like, well, they seem to have it together and I'm still this kind of mess. But no, you have to constantly remind yourself of where you started. And then you can, even with the mistakes, you can validate, you can love yourself and forgive yourself, if I'm making sense.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. So yeah, I never intended to do it. In England, the school that I ended up graduating from is equivalent to, Harvard. Okay. So this idea that I didn't intend to do that. My intention was I'm illiterate and I'm poor and this is very painful. So I had this equation in my head that literacy, education, and affluence, having things, would mean the opposite of pain. And so that's what drove me, was that I was trying to just push away. I was not looking at a goal. Nobody was more surprised when I got there than I was. And I remember when I got the acceptance letter, to the London School of Economics, and this relative that helped me is my grandmother. And I was sitting in her foyer and we're looking at this letter, and she's standing on the steps. And I think her intention was to help me. I don't think she had any clue that we were going to do this together. And, you know, this is a few years in, and we get this letters there, and I'm sure it's going to be, even every time I would do, like, I'd apply for something, I was positive. I almost had a nervous breakdown one time because I applied, when I applied to that school, I thought it's so ridiculous, even though I'd kind of created a way I thought I could do it, that even putting myself in a position to get rejected, I was like, why am I doing this? You've already been harmed so much. Why are you even trying to do something where you're just going to get kicked in the face again? And at one point I did that. And when I did the application at that school, it was the closest I ever came to a nervous breakdown, because I didn't sleep for 2 days getting the application in. And I thought, why am I doing this? Just to get another loss. So when I got in, she said to me, we were reading this letter in her foyer in her house in Westchester, and I'm accepted, and we're both kind of standing there stunned. And at this point, she's confused. You know, I don't think she ever expected to help me do that. And she said, "How are you doing this?" And what I said was, I don't know, but I lied. What I was thinking was, I'm fucking desperate. Right. So I think that what makes me different than most people, when it comes to that stuff, is I'm willing to sit there and endure the humiliation and endure the pain and be bad at something longer than most people.
Yeah.
And I think if you're willing, I think people give up on the 99-yard line. I think most people give up on the 90-yard line, right when, like, I almost feel like the world operates in this place where you have to move past the point, far past the point where you think it's impossible. And then it opens up. And the other thing I would say about that is, you know, we talk about Thomas Edison, and, you know, we talk about, like Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Okay, that's the definition of insanity. Well, to me, Einstein talked about genius being insatiable curiosity. Just, if you just are curious long enough, anybody could be one. Okay, and so what I think about when I think of how I did it, this is what was, you know, and again, no one's ever asked me this before, so this is completely new territory in terms of a conversation. Okay, but I want to make sure that I'm providing truth in terms of what happened. If insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting a different result, then genius is doing something differently over and over and over again until you get a different result. That's Edison. You know, 1,000 failures to 10,000 failures, then a light bulb. He kept changing the way that he did it. So it's about, you know, it's like almost a cliche that we have to fail. We learn from our failures. I can't stand that statement because it's such a cliche. But there's a truth in the sense that it's a process of elimination. And most people, when they have those failures, especially if they were put into a situation where they're having failures because they come from failure, it's very easy to give up. But if you're changing what you do, try again, fail, change what you do, try again, fail, change what you do, try again, fail, change what you do, and you're willing to live in that discomfort for years, then remarkable things can happen. And then also the way that you frame it is important. You know, I wasn't allowed to be a victim, which I think is horrible. You know, you have to understand, I was raised at 3 years old. I was not allowed to experience emotion. If we were crying, we were told we were dramatizing. We were trillion-year-old fallen gods in baby bodies. And all we had to do was just remember, you know, watch your step, kid, get your shit together. All right. So I can't explain the level of mental anguish. And I have a lot of empathy for the kids that grew up similar to me. whatever age they went in, even the staff kids that weren't in the machine like us, because, you can get this biological injury of trauma from having a distant father or mother, from being bullied. And the mechanism of having a nervous system that gets stuck in fight or flight, that's a mechanism that mechanism doesn't have a mind. It either gets tripped or it doesn't. So it used to be up until 5-6 years ago when I started, maybe 6-7 years ago when I started therapy, that led to this moment where I am now with this book. And people would say to me 6-7 years ago, before I did therapy for the first time, trauma is trauma. It used to really piss me off. I would kind of go, really? Let's line ours up, motherfucker. Okay. But once I learned the science, I got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And then I found out there was biological remediation for post-traumatic stress. And because I was a writer, I had all this access. And that's what led to the book. I wrote a book with the guy that came up with the way of resetting the nervous system, which is now you can do all over the United States. There's clinics opening up all over the world. There's a low-cost one in Tampa, right? Well, the first thing that happened is this woman diagnosed me. I talk about this in the book, and I laughed in her face. And she looked at me like I was crazy. I said, I don't have that. I didn't come here to be diagnosed. We're talking. I'm not here for a diagnosis. She said, well, I'm a clinician. Like, if there's a diagnosis, we're 8 weeks into this, I have to do this. This is my job. And she gives it to me. And I was like, it's ridiculous. And this woman looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, oh, Jamie, have you not listened to any of the stories you told me? I said, of course, I told them to you. Then how could you not have this? And the reality was, I was such a fucking fake, and I was such a fucking liar, Natalie, because I'm sorry if I'm swearing. I hope it's not too early in the video. If I'm doing something, I'll
It's
stop.
a little later.
Okay, I'll stop.
Hit your quota of the F-bombs there.
Okay, I'll stop. But I've been raised my whole life that being a victim is like being close to death. It's like being like, it's down there with like covert Smiler with a knife, Hitler, Manson. Like, being a victim is the worst thing you can be.
Yeah. L. Ron Hubbard said over and over and over and over and over again, we rather have you dead than incapable.
Wow. Well, I think he got his wish. But yeah, so I went home that day and I saw it. I was like, I've been victimized.
Yeah.
I am an abuse victim. I accepted what I was. I am a person that has been manipulated, abused, and completely destroyed. And I had to get to the point where I was willing to admit what I was, at least on the trauma side. Because that's what I had done, 20 years earlier with the education, was I was willing to admit where I was, but I wasn't willing to do that with trauma for another 25 years or something. Okay. Yeah. And so I had to admit where I was, and it was not good. I was complete phony, complete fake. I'm fine. I'm fine, and I was not fine. But once that happened, all sorts of things started coming my way in terms of, but I had to get to a point where I was willing to admit how far I had fallen, and how in the state of denial. I mean, they jerry rig us. We leave, but we leave with all these booby traps that keep us from looking at ourselves. We can't go get psychotherapy because those guys are responsible for the social decline of this sector of the universe for trillions of years, right? And we can't go get involved with those guys, right? So there's all these booby. You can't be a victim, right? Part of it was hitting, being honest with myself that I, again, facing the humiliation, like even being here right now. I don't want people to know that those things happened to me. I feel embarrassed about it.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. That is such a large part of it, and kind of a common denominator, I think, with a lot, because so much in Scientology, you're not allowed to be a victim. It's about the worst thing that you could do.
Yeah. And
coming to terms, there's so much I didn't know or realize till much later after I left Scientology. Similar things. My sister left long before I did and started therapy long before. And she'd be like, you have anxiety. I'm like, I don't have anxiety. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
You had trauma.
Well, when you have it for so long, it's like a limb.
It's
You
all
know,
you
it's
know.
all you know. And one thing, even when I saw, like, I went to take, like, right before I came on, I took a quick peek at your thumbnail, right? Which is an accurate thumbnail, right? If you look at the laws, the human trafficking laws in America really came into effect in 2001. So these things happening before then. But based on the current human trafficking laws, I mean, I was human trafficked, right?
Yeah.
The idea, but when I read that on your thumbnail, I felt sick.
Yeah.
But because I don't want to admit that ever happened to me. I'm completely humiliated that ever happened to me. But once I was willing to admit it 6-7 years ago, when I went and I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, it wasn't long after that because of my other work in art and science, or in my kind of artwork and my other writery, thinkery work, I was meeting these scientists, and I met these neuroscientists, and they were telling me about the biology of trauma. And then I'd heard through in my thinkery world, there was a military doctor that I knew that said that there's a new treatment for trauma as a biological injury that's being made mainstream. There's a private equity firm opening up clinics all over the world. And I braved COVID and went to this place in Chicago. It was like vanilla sky, to my tech support, and it was very, very out of character for me because I didn't go to doctors growing up. I had all sorts of medical conditions that almost killed me growing up, because by the time I would get to the doctor, it would be so far into it, I almost lost my hearing. I had an infection that almost that could have taken my life when I was 4. But like, I went to my grandmother's house in New York. She put me in the tub, screamed, emergency room. No one looked at my body, right? So I didn't even know if I had a baseline. But basically what happens is, and this is like the Invisible Machine book, which you should put up again because it's important, and I know I've talked about it. But basically what happens is when we live with prolonged stress, what the military calls operator syndrome, even if you're never in a war, or if you have blunt force trauma, it actually changes your biology. Your amygdala sends a signal to these nerves in your neck, in the stellate ganglion, which is where your sympathetic nervous system is, and you get added nerve growth there. So the signal then reverses. Normally, when you have a traumatic event, you swerve your car and you're elevated, then you come down 5 hours later. Well, if you go too high because of the event's too traumatic, like in a sexual assault, or your buddy being shot in front of you, like in the hood or in war, if you go too high, or you stay high too long, because of just the stress of, say, poverty, or the stress of your mother being abusive to you, if you stay high too long, then when the threat goes away, you get this extra nerve growth and it stays there. And then the signal reverses, telling your brain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year that a tiger is about to eat you. Okay. And that, when I'd been invited to speak to the military not long after I'd gotten this treatment on my artwork, to teach them about art and communication. Special forces, they do what's called unconventional warfare. So a big part of their job is to they build mosques and schools, and to collaborate with people on the ground, right? And so they're very interested in different ways that they can connect with people, and they were interested in my work. So I got invited to go speak to them at Fort Bragg, and I learned about this thing called operator syndrome, which is something that you get if you're at war. Say you're never in a firefight, but you're in Afghanistan for 3 deployments for 30 months, and you're away from your family, and there's an IED around every corner, and you don't know if you're going to see your wife and your kids again. And you're under this toxic stress that they call allostatic load, chronic intense stress. Well, these guys, even if they never see a war, like an actual fight, they come back with this condition called operator syndrome, which has these symptoms: hair trigger, anxiety, mild paranoia, sense of doom, lack of sleep, right? All the things you'd experience if a tiger jumped out at you. But the problem is we're meant to be in a tiger fight or have an experience with a tiger for about 30 to 90 seconds, where we either run away from the tiger, flight, get eaten by the tiger, or we kill the tiger. So fight or flight. And we're our bodies are designed to withstand that for about 30 to 90 seconds where we either get away or kill the tiger or get eaten by the tiger. When you get this injury, you're experiencing that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week. And you could see this on an fMRI. If I were to scan your brain, Natalie, I would see, and again, our brains fluctuate, but this would be chronic, and I could see this on a brain scan every day. It wouldn't change. I would see overactivity in your amygdala. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if I did this thing where they basically shut down your nervous system with a local anesthetic, takes 15 minutes a day, adult trauma's on the right, before puberty's on the left. You always do the right first. So some people have to go, most people have to go 2 days straight, 2 days back to back. It basically, by turning off the nervous system, when it comes back online, it resets to the pre-trauma state. I didn't even think it would work for me because I started this as a baby.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was to scan your brain after that, 2 weeks later, a month later, the next day, all that overactivity in the amygdala, we didn't go near your brain. We didn't drug you. All of it goes down because the nerve growth recedes. Mm-hmm. That's how we think it works. Okay. Yeah. So I did that, and it's the most transformational, important thing I've ever done in my life. And that's why I wrote the book. I was like, someone needs to bring this to regular people away from the military. The military is doing 30,000 a year. Obama endorsed this back in 2010, 2009. It's been on Rogan, 60 Minutes. The military studied the crap out of it. But I think a lot of people that are addicted to yoga are doing that because they're trying to regulate their nervous system. Right. Yeah. So I thought somebody has to do something to bring this to the regular people, because I think 30% of the U.S. population, global population, probably has this injury in our modern time. And ironically, I'd met this psychiatrist that liked my other work, this guy who was a forensic psychiatrist, and I'd heard about this thing, and it was really hard for me, Natalie. I reached out to this psychiatrist who was a fan of my artwork, and I said, I've heard about this treatment. He didn't know about it. He mostly works on brain health. And I said, can you vet this for me and tell me if it's BS? And he gave me this whole way. He sent me these papers, and he gave me this whole methodical way of vetting it. And I decided that there was no physical risk to my body in terms of for a procedure. It was safe. And that the upside was so staggering in such a short period of time that I had to try it. And if I hadn't have tried it, this would be a very different conversation.
Yeah. What does that feel like then to go from, because again, as you talk about it, it's just, you don't know anything else. That's just the normal. And then if it's not, if you don't, it's like the tiger is always hidden away, but it just feels like it's right there. Like you're just about to.
Yeah. I mean, one of the
time.
I mean, I'm going to say this, and I hope I don't want to make you emotional, but I want to say this. One of the huge audience
sailed.
one of the huge contingents of people in the world that I architected and wanted this book out there for was cancer survivors. Because if you survive that or go through that, or you're going to have this injury. You're living with allostatic load every day, all day in an intense way. And these guys, and so that's not even something that the APA is thinking about when they're thinking about somebody with post-traumatic stress. There's a post-traumatic stress disorder does not exist. They've been trying to change the name since 2012 to post-traumatic stress injury. It's a physical injury. We can see it on a brain scan. We know exactly where it is. And I can when I do readings and stuff, there's always some cynic that gets up in the audience that has more degrees than me, that's a therapist or a neuroscientist, and hey, man, who do you think you are? Get off my lawn. And I always say the same thing to them. Okay. And they stop arguing with me. And I tell them about this book that was written in 1970 and Coretta Scott King by all these Stanford scientists. One of the guys is Frank Ochberg, I consider him a friend now. He's older. He's in the 80s, but he defined Stockholm syndrome for the FBI in the 70s. And he was the guy that coined the term post-traumatic stress injury that's been trying to get the APA to change the name. He's a psychiatrist. He was the one when I met him and I told him part of my story. He said, you were raised by wolves. And so this book he wrote with a bunch of Stanford scientists called Violence and the Struggle for Existence. It was came out in 1970, 2 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated. Coretta Scott King did the foreword to the book. There's a chapter in there called Biology and Aggression. And what they explain in that chapter is we know trauma is biological. We just don't know how. And here's how we know. And I've given this example on other conversations. If you take a dog, a horse, a cat, a rabbit, a zebra, an elephant, any animal, and you just torture it for a month, you just abuse it for a month straight to the point of just torture, but you let it live. You could then take that animal and put it in the Ritz-Carlton for the rest of its life. It's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
It's going to either be very, very timid flight or very, very aggressive fight. We didn't just give that animal disorder. We changed its biology. Okay.
Yeah.
And now we know how. So all your anxieties, all the things that, you know, the hypervigilance, the hyperarousal, the hair trigger, the lack of sleep, the sense of doom, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, all the things that we all have. This is all operator syndrome. Okay. This is all just extra nerve growth in your neck lying to your amygdala. It's a physical injury. And a combination of that and brain health and a couple of other factors. And these things are all remediatable with, you know, you can remediate your brain holistically with vitamins and being clean. You know, if you've had a lot of concussions or you've done a lot of drugs and alcohol, you've damaged your brain. So it's a combination of these three things. And I pretty much in this book, I break apart, okay, how much is the brain and how much is the nervous system and how do you need to take care of both? And so all these scientists are kind of stuck in their specialty and I had access to them. So like as an artistic person that understands data or information, I tried to, and I think I did a pretty good job, show people what was going on inside their bodies. And even if they chose not to get the treatment, there's no way you can read this book and not know when you're done that when you're feeling that way, it's biological.
Yeah.
And right there, even if you never do the treatment, I just changed your life because I've taken your stigma away.
True.
You're not broken. You're not just a crazy person, right? That's now gone. And that alone was worth doing the book.
Yeah.
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 So one thing I want to say that would be different, like we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation and we could maybe talk about the resilience book. I want to make sure I tell people about that because it's a kid's book and I'm really proud of it and it's new. Yeah. But what would have been different about this conversation, Natalie, and I'm very impressed that you're keeping going because I know you got a lot going on and this conversation, there's all sorts of
crying through the whole thing.
yeah.
The audience is used to it by now.
but this is how much it's changed me. If I had not done this treatment, I wouldn't have been able to have this conversation. It happened 2 or 3 times, like while I was still connected to that group, where it would come up what happened to me as a kid in an interview or something like that. And my body would physically shut down. It was like there was a serpent in me. And the minute I looked at it, this part of me that I didn't know existed would rise out of nowhere and consume me. I would be I wouldn't be able to talk.
Wow.
And it was so powerful that I just said, I can never go there. I can never talk about my childhood because I can't let that serpent out. Because what if it doesn't go back in the cage? You know? And so what the DSR has done for me is that we could even get through this conversation. Like before, if I started talking to you about the living conditions and we didn't even get into the child abuse. I just talked about not showering, no school, you know, we didn't get into the abuse. Okay. Yeah. Not brushing your teeth, not clean, like not having anybody to love you. Right. If I said that to you before I did this treatment, not having anyone to love you, I would be turning off the computer and pulling my hair out. Like I really, literally, physiologically wouldn't be able to say those words and then have the memory.
Wow. And when did you do the treatment?
I did the treatment and then I got completely unexpected. I got invited to Fort Bragg to speak. And that's when they showed me the operator syndrome at a post-traumatic stress meeting. And when I saw those 13 symptoms, which I could read off, they're on a pad down there, I didn't see soldiers. I had no experience with the military. I saw the Mexican immigrants where I grew up, the stress of poverty, and I saw people that grew up in this coercive control environment. And I was like, no, it can't be. It can't be that the people I grew up with from the stress of that group have the exact same symptoms as someone coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. That can't be. That was the spark where I went, I need to find out.
Yeah. That's
and I went, yeah.
That
So
is,
I went to, yeah. So I went to a prison and I interviewed murderers. Like I went crazy. Rwandan genocide survivors, like and then I wanted to see if the symptoms were the same, no matter what the trauma was. If it truly was apathetic, like just this thing that you tripped, that was the curiosity. And that you can get this from being bullied. You can get this from having a father or a mother that doesn't hug you, right? I mean, everyone's biology is a little different. So everyone can be tripped differently. My allostatic load is different than your allostatic load, right? Or chronic stress, right? But the answer is I did it about, God, 20, I guess 3.5 years ago.
wow.
Yeah. And everything was very fast. And then I went to Fort Bragg and I started learning. And then all of a sudden I was in an opportunity to write a book because I was talking to all these scientists that weren't necessarily comparing notes. And I thought, gosh, if I help them put their notes together, I think we could have something unique that could help people.
Yeah. Were they ever going to bring it or introduce it to just kind of like everyday people in the way that this book has and what your work has done? Or was it something that you think would have always just kind of continued on with being used in the military? And it's interesting that you said that because that's what my neurologist in the end told me is they're like, we usually see this in people. They're like, were you in the military?
Now read my book and they could read my book. I mean, even the most cynical person could read my book or read our book. A lot of scientists worked on that book. It's not just my effort. It was a team of people.
Yeah.
And I don't think they would think that even if they started reading it and they were cynical. Again, I'm convinced that 30 to 40% of the US and global population have this injury. And I could go into a lot of reasons why I believe that. I mean, just take the figure of women, 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted sometime in their lifetime. I mean, and then you start getting into 70% of human beings in their lifetime will experience a traumatic event. When you start adding all these little subdivisions up of how we get trauma, you can quickly get to 30 to 40% of the population has extreme trauma or unbearable allostatic load. And then the modern world of living in these synthetic environments, nature calms the nervous system. I meet people. I wanted to bring this to kindergarten teachers, to yoga instructors. I wanted to bring this to CEOs, to regular people. That's what the point of the book is. One of the reasons I decided to do that is a private equity firm in Chicago decided to open up clinics all over the world. So people could get it with the modern standard. This thing is new in the sense that even if you read a paper from when I went to Fort Bragg for the first time, they were doing it off a 7-year-old paper, which was only 1/3 of it or 1/4 of it, and it was wearing off. Now with all the modern protocols, it's 85 to 90% effective in the, pretty much permanent worst effects of what post-traumatic stress does to you. And all of that. So it's highly refined in the last 7 years. But if there wasn't this private equity firm, that there's 35 clinics in the US right now. If they hadn't decided to open this up all over the world, I probably wouldn't have done them because then what am I doing? Nobody can get it. But now anyone can get it anywhere. You and I have friends that just got it.
Yeah.
As we both know, right? Yeah.
That is true. And it's very exciting. And it just brings so much hope. Just even the concept and the idea and the truth that this is an injury and not a disorder is a game changer, I think, for so many people. I didn't realize that the idea that it's PTSI, an injury instead of a disorder, has been around, that's being fought for to change for so many years. I
think 38 states, they haven't got the APA to do it yet, but I think 38 states have taken on the term post-traumatic stress injury. This is happening. This is not, I know that, there's rumors out there. Like I've been accused of it's not FDA approved. I've been accused. Listen, when I wrote the book, I'm not a stupid person. I've seen a lot in the world. I knew of the criticisms that would come at me. I had seen the data. I talked to enough of the most kind of prominent neuroscientists in the world, asked them about the data, saw the data myself. I mean, I really looked at this thing and I thought, okay, if I'm wrong, then I will be willing to admit that I'm wrong, but I'm not wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
The science is in, we know it. And again, I'm not the only person that knows it. Obviously, this guy that owns this private equity firm decided to open it up everywhere. But even then, they're focusing on deep trauma victims. I've probably sent 100 people in the last couple of years, maybe more, probably a lot more than that. But most of the time, I'm sending people that are regular people that don't think they had trauma. I sent a social worker from North Carolina who, had IBS, and all that happened to her was her mother needled her entire childhood. She did this thing, and her IBS went down to 10%. Most autoimmune, the stuff, when you have this thing on all the time, it discombobulates the immune system. Yeah. So when you see most autoimmune stuff is coming from the nervous system being stuck in fight or flight.
Which is so fascinating, because so many people that I've known, in our community, myself included, I have 2 autoimmune diseases. My sister has a couple. It's just
and when I tell you those symptoms, Natalie, right? Lack of sleep, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, sense of doom, mild paranoia, hair trigger, reactivity, just always having to keep like that.
Yeah.
Is it resonating with you?
Oh, completely. I thought I was just talking to my Tony, because when we were in Clearwater not that long ago, protesting at Flag, that was so huge for me to be able to do that. And prior to being there, it's like these things that you don't even realize that you're doing that are, irrational or as a result of trauma. And because maybe it doesn't happen all the time, so you don't see it. But I would have this thing where I would, if somebody comes to the door and I don't know, I freak out. I run. I'm not I will you come at me in person, I will flex. But if you knock on my door, I would just have this instinct to just hide, duck down. And we do that all the time when we
I relate to that so much. I mean, before this treatment, if someone came to my door, the mail would cause me anxiety. The mail.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't like to look through my mail, so I get it. And so it's I have to remind myself sometimes. I've gotten used to it now. And sometimes I'm like, that thing. And then I have to remind myself of how I was before. And I go, okay, the only downside is people get inured to it. You get used to not being that way all the time. And then you can quickly forget of how you were before you did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or even having I know that all I know is that after that trip to Clearwater, it's in fact, the place we were staying, somebody came to the door. And at first I was like, and then I went, I'll just get the door. And I got the door. And it's I think for me that was one thing I was able to change. I'm not feeling that now. And I think for me, it was fighting back against Scientology.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Going to Chicago and protesting, going to Clearwater and protesting, and just fighting back and pushing back and disobeying.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, being disobedient, just doing everything that we were never allowed to do in Scientology. And suddenly, if my doorbell rings now since I've been home, because that's the thing. In this day and age, who shows up unannounced? It hardly happens. But it's happened one time, and it happened once in Clearwater, and I realized whoa, I'm not running and hiding because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, Aaron kind of talked me out of the shadows, and it took a few months. We were talking, and, he kept saying, look at it from this perspective, look at it from that perspective. And I think that it's been really, really, really hard knowing that people know this about me now, really hard. Yeah. But I'm still in that. But I do think in the long term, just not having the secret.
Yes.
Has made me calmer.
Yeah.
I'm still in it. I have bad days, where I'm like, why did I do that? Right. But I think I feel like I'm going to be getting to a place where I'm freeing myself, even if it's a process.
Yeah. And it's so worth it.
Yeah.
It impacts so many other people. It can help that your story and experiences and sharing it has the power to help so many other people. That I can see why I'm so glad that you did. Let's talk about this. How did you parlay this into the children's book about resilience?
Okay. Well, I think why that book's important is, is that book is the reason I came out. There's a publishing company called A Kid's Book About that does all these incredible books about subjects you're not supposed to talk to kids about. And I've been talking to them for years about doing stuff. And
Yeah.
then finally last year, we agreed to do this kid's book about resilience. Okay. And I was workshopping and making the book with the publisher. And the whole point of the book is to how you frame something. Like I was trained to frame myself, to frame things in very weird ways, due to the way we grew up. And how you frame something has a huge impact on how you deal with something. And part of what I was teaching these kids in this book is how you face hard things. How do you face hard things, and how do you frame it? And while I was writing this book with this publisher, all I'm thinking about is how I'm a phony and a fraud because I have this secret and I'm not willing to deal with it because it's too hard. And I think that me trying to give this message of framing things a certain way to kids was part of the reason that when I started talking to Aaron, that I was open. And I was hearing him. I don't think if I had been doing this, I would have been hearing him. So what I think is important about the book, to answer your question, and then maybe we should open questions if people want to ask a few questions, because I know we've gone long.
Yeah, we got a bunch of questions.
Yeah, is how did I do? I did most of the things that I've done and had gotten myself to this point before I did this treatment. How did I do that? I explain how I did that in this kid's book.
And that's the book, a kid's book about resilience.
Yeah, if you want to know how I did it, I tell you, I basically say, this is the frame of mind that with all this biological injury to my body, with all this stuff stuck on me, this is the kernel singular frame of mind that I took that got me through to a point where I could start to really get some recovery. And I still have a long way to go, I'm sure, so I want people to understand how I did that with all the things still on top of me. Yeah. I want you to read it because I know you're going through a hard time right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you're going through an impossible time and you're like, this is impossible. Okay. That's who that book is for. Okay. There is no way out. That's who that book is for.
All right. I just ordered it just now.
Oh, all right. Well, make sure your Tony reads it too. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I just click in cart, buy now.
Hi, Cece. I know Cece. Cece was around when I was a kid, and she's reached out to me since I've kind of become public, and I'm really appreciative because she worked in the same place that my mother did when I was growing up, and she's been just incredibly beautiful and supportive human to me. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's try a couple questions. The boobologist, Jamie, does the treatment work for people with bipolar or other brain injuries that don't have to do with trauma?
Okay, well, I'm not a scientist, so I'm giving my opinion. Okay, I believe that if you take an approach to brain health, and the best brain health, physical health, mental health, the best just life health feed on the internet is Daniel Amen's Instagram feed. So I would recommend everyone go to Instagram.
I've read some
like me on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. Message me if you ever want to talk, but also follow Doc Amen, and you will have a better life by following Daniel Amen. Okay.
I didn't know he was on Instagram. I've read a couple of his books about ADHD. I would love to follow.
Oh, go on. I mean, everything from how to raise kids to alcohol to cannabis to all some of the things that we think are bad are good for us, and some of the things we think are good are bad for us. And he has all the brain science. And and he's just and he's able to explain it in such a simple way. He even does videos on like how to raise strong and resilient children. I mean, he's just an amazing guy. I mean, he's one of the guys that stepped up to help me do this.
Wow.
And I'll be forever grateful to him because I would not have been able to do this book without his help.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So yeah, where were we?
Questions. I don't know if it's huzzah or huzzah.
Yeah.
Jamie, I love reading your kids' book with my 7 and 3-year-old. It sparks so many amazing conversations every time we read it. And my daughter opens up so much, and we're all learning resilience.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Selfless Self. Hey, Selfless Self. question. What inspired you to come out and start telling your story like this? And when did you start studying psychology and neurology to understand these concepts the way that you do?
It's a great question, and I'm going to answer it as kind of I see that name around a lot. That selfless self person.
Yeah.
They're one of the Squirrel Squad or something.
He is a live streamer Scientology protester that has traveled and protested at multiple Scientology.
All right, I'm going to go check him out when I get off.
You should.
Him or her, whoever selfless self is.
Yeah.
Okay. But the answer is, God, what was the question again? You put it up one more time.
Of course, I had to. I just got rid of it.
Okay, it was like, when did I start studying it? When did
Yeah.
I start studying it? Well, when I did that therapy and I admitted to myself that I had it, I decided to write a book. Now, when I decided to write a book with the inventor of this procedure, I thought that it would just trickle down into the kids where I grew up. It's such a great question, selfless self, because I've been wanting to say this, and I don't think I've been able to say this, but it's a really important that I do say it. So I thought it would just trickle into this community of people that I really kind of stayed away from because I didn't want to be constantly triggered by it. And I feel like they took my childhood. And if I was like hanging out with people that have been through this, then they'd have my adulthood. Yeah. That was my view. But there's also something to be said about being around and talking to people that have had a shared experience. But my solution was to like get away and pretend it never happened. Okay. So one of the things that made me want to write it was something for the people that I grew up with. And when, 8 months went by and it didn't trickle down to that community, quite honestly, selfless self, I was feeling guilty about that. And that is a huge factor of what coaxed me out, of why I went and had that conversation with Aaron. I felt a responsibility to bring this to the kids and adults that grew up in this machine or on the outside of this machine that were put into this mechanism and damaged by it. And that was a huge part of, I started learning it once I did the treatment on myself. I went in a deep dive for a year or two. And then I did study, I went to a data science school. So I appreciate data. And then I felt like, okay, if this isn't trickling down in there, I need to do the brave thing, the hard thing, do it the hard way, and just humiliate myself to make sure that at least the people that I grew up with or have been through a similar experience to me are aware that it exists. And that's the truth of it.
You came back for us.
I mean, I came back. I don't want to sound, that sounds like way more heroic than I feel or how I see it. I was willing to humiliate myself for people that I felt a shared experience with, that I felt like I had a responsibility to.
Oh, that's
and still do too. Like, it's like, people don't understand, like, when you grow up in this machine, like the people that chose it, like the first generation, I don't think they're like us. It doesn't mean we always get along. It doesn't mean that I hang out and like all the people that I grew up with. But I think we are more like a brotherhood and a sisterhood. We're more like people that have gone through war together in terms of how we see the world. We were, because we didn't have a choice, we were kind of fused into this thing. Our sense of camaraderie is very different than the people that were recruited into it as adults. Yeah. So I definitely feel like it's a band of misfit toys, broken toys, and I feel like I'm one of you, and you're part of me, and I learned from you. I've learned from your show. I've learned from Aaron's show. I've learned, when Liz did that list, it broke me. And that was very healing for me, just to see the volume, because I know most of the people on that list, right? And it's only a tiny part of the list, because it's the people that have come out, or the people we know about. The list is 10 times longer. And so it's also been incredibly, even though I didn't want to do it, it's been incredibly fortunate for me.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm still in, today, right now in this moment. I'll have it. Yeah.
No one's asking, do you have much contact with your brother, Danny? I knew him briefly at the Shangri Lodge.
Yes, I do. He's one of my favorite people on the planet Earth. He's in New York. He did an interview with Aaron. That's a fantastic interview. So you can find that if you just do Danny Mustard on Aaron's channel. He's in New York. I don't want to say too much other than if you want to know about Danny, go on YouTube and Google homeless mustard creep. And what will come up will be a video of him singing with 40 million views.
Wow.
Yeah. And it is one of the most emotional and beautiful things you will ever see in your life. And that got him off the streets, off addiction, and living his life now where he is now. And he's on Facebook and he's around and we didn't know each other that well growing up, but he's become one of my most favorite people on this planet Earth and somebody that I rely on. He is smart as a tack and he's been through hell, but his way of looking at the world and the advice that he gives me, I just feel really, really lucky to know him.
That's so awesome. Selma is saying, Jamie, for me as a never in, I just want to tell you how impactful you sharing your story is to me. I always watch you in awe and I'm so happy for you that you found your way and your voice.
I really appreciate that. It's really weird to see a comment like that, only because I feel sometimes, and I would love for you to comment on this, Natalie. I feel like I shouldn't feel good about surviving something that should have killed me. Like that shouldn't be something that one wears with a badge,
Yeah.
But I appreciate the comment, but I'm always conflicted when I hear comments like that, because it's a lot of my friends didn't survive it.
Yeah. I totally get that.
Yeah.
All right. So Ms. Chief wants to know, are you in touch with any of the other babies from the facility you were in?
Well, one woman reached out to me that was my caretaker, and she wasn't a lot older than me. She was maybe 7, but she was assigned to me at various points, and that's been really powerful. As far as kids that were in that baby facility in downtown LA, I don't think there's a lot of us. There was a building right after that. Before the Fountain Building, before Big Blue, we call it, or we called it the complex. There was a red brick building in Hollywood that was really a lot worse. And, a lot of the kids.
Where the babies were? Over by Celebrity Center?
No, that was the annex.
Yeah.
Building was over on Norris. Several of those kids have taken their own lives. So I have a hard time having survived.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that you're sharing this, because I feel that it gives meaning and is a way to honor those people.
Yeah. So, that place was a different kind of place, even for what kids that maybe when they were 5 or went in to the Fountain Building, or what people know as the ATA. It was a different kind of place.
Yeah, definitely. Brooke is asking, how do you feel the messages from Us Never In should be to help this evolution?
I think that, one of the things that was the most surprising for me about this whole experience with talking to Aaron and then doing that, is the people that reach out to me, because I encourage people to reach out to me on Insta for treatment, or if they really want to have a conversation. I feel that what shocked me is that 99% of the people that reach out, and I've realized 99% of this audience, is people that have experienced trauma, that are somehow identifying with people that survived this. And so what I want people to understand is that trauma is a biological injury that affects people. Trauma actually is trauma. I've come to that conclusion. And so, I think the most thing that we can do in life is, let's continue to bring this thing down so that it can stop hurting people. But also, and again, I'm telling myself this as I say this, is when we see people that do things that are bad or mean that we can't stand, let's understand that a lot of the people that are doing things that we don't like have this injury in their body that is lying to their brain. And that's why they're engaging in behaviors that are hurtful or that we can't take. And so let's grant grace to that. That being said, there's narcissists out there, and stay away from them. Okay. But let's grant grace to each other whenever we can.
I like that. That makes a ton of sense.
And that's something I have to work on every day, and I fail at. But that's probably the most important thing that's happened to me philosophically is now when I see people that used to repulse me before, that were, homeless people that reminded me of growing up in the streets of LA, or hustlers, or all these things that used to kind of trigger me. My instant feeling isn't repulsion anymore. My instant feeling is I know what's going on inside their body, so I feel compassion for them. And that's probably been the biggest kind of like philosophical change in my mindset of the world. And I really feel lucky for that.
And it's so much more in alignment with what really helped you initially, which is that unconditional love.
I do really believe, again, this was something I was learning about yesterday at this talk, and I never thought about it, but I am of the belief that if you can love someone despite whatever they do, as long as they're worthy and a good person, they're not like, again, there's people with narcissistic personality out there, and they're victim narcissists, and they will suck you dry. Okay. But if you can love people despite the fact that they don't deserve to be loved, you can heal people. And I think it's such a ridiculous John Lennon thing to say, but there's actually starting to be neuroscience that proves that. Yeah.
Makes so much sense. I just love when science backs up what always has really felt right.
Yeah.
Tim saying, I'm just getting to this fantastic live video. Jamie's incredible. I was hoping for Natalie to do this interview. The best interviewer with probably the most informative guest yet. Thank you, Tim. That's super sweet. Keiko has a question. Would love to know where we can find the talk Jamie watched about love and resiliency.
It'll come out in the next couple of months. I don't think it'll come out immediately. But it was TEDx Portland, and I can't follow me on Instagram, send me a message, and I'll send you the name of the girl. It was all about love and neuroscience, and I had never thought about it before, but yeah,
that's amazing. Irrelevant Panda says, Jamie, I entirely understand if you never want to, but if you ever did want to write your story, I hope you know that the rest of us would just view you as a stronger and more impressive.
Thank you.
Bridge 1872 is asking what the name is of the Tampa clinic.
It's not a Stella Center, and it's less expensive. So follow me on Insta and send me a message, and I will get you the information right away. Okay,
good. Shirley, thank you for the super chat. Says, sad part is accepting there is no body of government that will take any actions to stop these barbaric tortures of humans. Who do we see about that? We're here to love you all back to a healing point.
Well, I will say this, a lot of this stuff happened to us in the 70s and 80s. Okay. And, we can't always look back on the world of the 70s and 80s with like a 2024 lens. It was a different world. We didn't have the human trafficking laws until 2000, 2001. Okay. People weren't wearing seatbelts in the 70s. They were paddling kids in schools, right? So the world was a scarier place back then in general. I don't want to make excuses for anybody because what we've been subjected to is inexcusable. Okay. But I think that, one of the things I hear a lot of talk about is, is this kind of like, it's become like an industry almost. I hear this word exposing, Hubbardology or SCN or, this group. Okay. And, I don't really, people have these channels and they've been doing it for years and it's kind of like, well, I'm exposing the group. I don't think exposing the group is a career. Okay. And at this point, I feel like the group, just to answer the question, if you want my honest opinion, at this point, I feel like between the work of Leah Remini and Mike and Aaron and you and a lot of others. Chris Shelton has been doing this for a long time. I feel like the group has been exposed. I really do. I think people know what this thing is now. And the next stage of this is rip it down. That's how you can help. What this next stage, I don't care what anybody says about, the certain aspects of the downside of protests, the upside far, far outweighs it. Okay. And again, it was seeing a sign at the Shrine Auditorium 20 years ago when I was kind of on the fence where it says SCN breaks up families out of the corner of my eye. That put a worm in my head. So people can say that it causes you to dig in. It put a worm in my head. Okay. So I think at this point, anything you can do to show up and help support the Squirrel Squad and understand that we're no longer exposing this thing. We're at the rip down period. We're tearing it down now. That's the shift that's occurred. Yeah, that's the shift that's occurred in the last year, especially with these beautiful, beautiful Squirrel Squad people that are out there shutting it down all over the world every day. That needs to grow. And that's the next stage of this thing. We're stop talking about exposing it. Everybody knows what it is now. Mm-hmm. Let's rip it down.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Will's Pickle Jar says, so glad I made this live. I couldn't do the Stella Center because of scheduling, but I did get a DSR/SGB, and that's what the treatment's called, right?
Yeah, DSR SGB. SGB has been around for 25 years. It's FDA approved for pain. When you get it with all of the modern protocols, which is really what makes it effective, then it's called DSR SGB, and that's what you need to get. If you're not getting DSR SGB, you're not getting it. So whoever Wills, if you could please follow me on Insta, send me a message. I'd like to know of this clinic in Portland. I have a lot of people in Portland that I didn't know there was a clinic here that was doing it. So I actually could use that clinic. So if you could please follow me on Insta and send me a message so that I can be aware of that clinic, I would greatly appreciate it.
There you go.
Okay.
Here's a comment. Jamie, you're an amazing man. I'm in awe of your achievements, but to overcome what you've been through, you're tough.
Thank you. Well, that's what the kids' book is about. I don't know that. I think toughness is a mechanical thing that anyone can have if they understand what the anatomy of toughness is. A lot of times people want to know how I do things. Like I tend to reverse engineer things. I almost see myself, and maybe I've said this before, as like an escape artist. Like I can get out of locks and chains really well, like a Houdini, right? And I reverse engineer things. And I think I reverse engineer how anyone can be tough in a kid's book about resilience. Because that book is how I accomplished things before I got treatment, before I ever got therapy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
D. Marie's asking, are you on X?
I am. I'm not there a lot, like I'm not doing a lot of stuff, but I'm definitely on X. And if you follow me on X and send me a message, like maybe you'll get me to return to X. I probably need to I need to get back on X. So give me a reason.
Bambina's asking, is there a clinic in Switzerland that offers the treatment?
I'm not positive. There could be. Wouldn't surprise me. Send me a message on Insta, and I will look into whether there is a place in Switzerland you can get it.
Yes. Okay. And then in case anybody didn't catch it, we were just talking about, let's see, I probably pulled it down because I was ordering my book. In fact, that's probably my order.
Yeah, that's funny. A kid's book about resilience by Jamie Mustard, right?
That's right. A kid's book about resilience. And I'm going to pull up your other book here too, which is The Invisible Machine, which is also available on Amazon.
Yeah. And again, when it comes to promoting books, it's like you can look at it like, okay, this person's here promoting their books, but a book is just pages with an idea on it, right? And you can get my book at the library. Mm-hmm. So I'm here to promote ideas that are going to give people relief, okay, and have a better understanding of what's going on inside themselves. And I feel very good about doing that.
I think it's fantastic. I thank you so much for being here. Truly, I've been looking forward to this since the day after my interview with Aaron back in December.
Well, this was very different than what I thought we were going to do. It went a whole different direction than what I had kind of imagined. But I thank you. This was different and special. And I really appreciate you creating a place where we could have this kind of a conversation, Natalie. I won't forget it.
Good. I'm glad. Well, you hold tight. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Would love it if you'd hit that like button on your way out, and be sure that when you subscribe that you set your notification bell so that you know when I go live doing more interviews like this, because I know I love doing it and I'd love for you guys to join me. Thank you again, Jamie, and everybody. You know the drill. I hope you all get out there and have an amazing cult-free day.
And